Well, I think the Wall of Respect did a lot of things. It didn't just show you some people that you may or may not have heard of, but it told you you had the right to recognize them, that you could recognize them in the way that you wanted to. This was, after all, the renegade movement. You know, the artists got up there and did it. They didn't necessarily go through all the permitting processes and all those things to do. They just felt that it was important to do this, and they did it. So it was not just that you got a chance to see the heroes and sheroes depicted, but you got a chance to understand that your heroes belong to you, that your art belonged to you, that you could use it to help rescue our sense of pride, and it spurred a movement that went across the country.
I first became aware of the wall as it was being created. I was one of the leaders of the theater movement, the Black Theater Movement in Chicago, but also was an active participant in Obasi. So as we were planning as a collective, because Obasi started out as a collective organization of artists, philosophers, writers, theater people, and so because you have so many creative egos in the room, it became necessary to create a number of different organizations to satisfy that. So Obasi, in a number of ways, splintered off. It became a writers guild as a portion of it. AfriCobra came out as a result of it. The Black Theater Movement created the Chicago Black Theater Alliance. The Kumba Workshop came out of that. And so I knew about the Wall of Respect and performed with our theater company in front of the wall after it had gone up. I think that two things have to happen to understand the wall. The first is where art was in the black community prior to its development. Most of us that were growing up during that period of time had a couple of pictures of on our walls at home. There was some art, some artificial bananas and apples. There was a picture of Jesus, and there would be a picture of Martin Luther King. And that was fundamentally it. The Black Arts Movement created an opportunity for us to begin to look at objectives that would help us as a people. So for example, philosophically, we created the notion that for art to be black art, it had to be by, for, and about black people. Which basically meant that if black art was drawn by a white person, that did not make it black art. If a black person was drawing trees, that did not make it black art. It had to principally be about the development of people and how they expanded and grew. But as you look at the wall, you have to look at it in tandem with everything that was happening during that period of time. The Afro Arts Theater, the Southside Center for the Performing Arts, the Southside Community Arts Center, the DuSable Museum, even Ile Ife, which was an African temple, Yoruba temple that was on 31st Street. All of these things were developing at the same time and converging into what ultimately became a collective movement. So the Wall of Respect in some ways didn't, in my estimation, didn't necessarily represent guerrilla art. It represented an opportunity for us to create framing about what we were and what we should be. And that came about as a result of a collective movement. It wasn't independent. Those artists got together with all of us collectively, and we began to look at what is our purpose, like what is the role of art? Is it to move people forward, or is it just to create it for art's sake? And so all of the movements, I think, that happened around that period of time were done in tandem. The other thing I'd like to say about the Wall of Respect is that it grew out of a notion of the need to improve how we felt about ourselves. It became ultimately responsible for a mural movement that took place around the country. But in essence, the reason that the wall was created, and it was originally called the Wall of Heroes, was to begin to pay homage to those people that were doing something to benefit our growth as a people. And that's why the images were created and how they were selected for who would be on the wall.
I went on all the marches that Dr. King led here in Chicago, all of them. Okay, I was a foot soldier at that point, And the film that they shot of him, I'm in that film. Not as reading poetry, but just sitting in the audience. Just they beamed in on me. But I felt, and what we felt as artists, as poets, as visual artists, as writers, as photographers, as dancers, as musicians, and we're all very young. That must not ever be forgotten. We were all, I mean, when the Wall of Respect was put up, I was 25 years old. Okay, I found Third World Press when I was 25 years old. Okay, and so we are full of energy, and many of us did not believe in turn the other cheek. You know, I came out of the military. I had 3 years in the United States Army. When the military at 18 years old, came out at 21 years old, and so immediately went back into movement, and you know, continued to try to write. So the heroes that are on the Wall of Respect, you know, from Malcolm X to Muhammad Ali to, you know, Rap Brown, and there are two versions. You have the original version, then you have another version of the wall, okay? So I'm looking at the original version, and it must be, I need to give these names out in terms of the painters and the printmakers and the photographers, you know, Sylvia Abernathy, Jeff Donaldson, Elliot Hunter, Wordsworth Gerald, Barbara Jones, Carolyn Lawrence, Norman Parrish, William Walker, and Marna Weaver, and the photographers Billy Abernathy, Daryl Calhert, Roy Lewis, and Robert Sintak, and Edward Christmas, mixed media commercial artist. And this was 1967, okay? And it was destroyed in 1971. And so when you look at the heroes, from John Coltrane to Amiri Baraka to Gwendolyn Brooks to John Oliver Killens to the Nation of Islam to you know, the major musicians, Muhammad Ali, the boxer, and so forth, that these were heroes that were not in the mainstream in many cases. But we have recognized them as being very important to us, okay? And that's why they were on the wall. An interesting thing about this wall also is that this was self-sponsored. Just like the institutions that we built here, this is not with grant money, okay? This was money coming generally from the community, from the people in the community. The wall was so critical that when they would put it up, they thought that they would have to watch it 24 hours a day themselves, the artists, but the people watched the wall. Okay, the people in the community. It was never defaced or anything, and there was activity going on all the time in front of the wall. You know, most certainly for the first year and a half. You know. So it was very important, and it helped put Chicago Black Arts Movement on the map. You see, must understand that the Black Arts Movement started after the assassination of Malcolm X. And it hit all over the country simultaneously. And so you had the East Coast, you had the Midwest, you had the West, South, the Mid-South, and so forth. And so in all these areas, black artists were stepping out and saying, we're going to do our own thing. That's when we began to say, we're not Negroes, but we are black people. We're men and women of African ancestry. And that we're not going to be called out of our names anymore. So we began to rewrite the history, or to write the correct history. We began to really, and that's when, you know, Third World Press began to move beyond publishing poetry to publishing history, psychology, books on education, and so forth. And so this temper of the time was very volatile. You think you got police out of order today? It was really out of order in the '60s, and into the '70s and early '80s. And so we, through our art, you know, I'm a poet and I'm, you know, an essayist, but also I was an educator. I mean, I was in the academy for 42 years, and just retired in 2011. So for over 42 years, I was teaching at the university level, and universities as diverse as UIC, Columbia College, Cornell University, University of Iowa, Chicago State, and DePaul University, and so forth. And many of the artists found work in the academy. You know, I used to teach at Howard University, and Jeff Donaldson was head of the art department at Howard University. Mary DePillars, one of the artists of Afro Cobra, spent a good deal of his time at UVC, Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, which he was a dean. Okay, so writers and artists, we've all tried to stay alive by, in some cases, working in the academy, because the academy gave us time to do our work. We didn't have to hit an 8-hour clock working for people who don't even like you, most of the time.
We developed a wall of respect on the paper, on the tabletop. Jeff said, what couldn't we do? I said, well, I'm sad to see so many people getting killed over nothing. If a guy is going to clean off the side of his building and get shot down by a drive-by, that's not good. That's not good. We got to develop some respect in the community. We got to, as artists, let's say we have to put together something. We got to go find a building, get some paint, put something on that building. We're going to have to find one of the locations where the gangbangers are very hot and give them something so they can show the community, people who drive through can see something that gives them some respect and happy that they can show to the community. This is our wall. This is done for you. This is so you can have something better than drive-by shooting, standing on the corner while you can be shot down. So we got together, we found a wall at 43rd and Langley, abandoned building. We scraped and walled, we scraped all the old paint was loose. We had to process the wall. Groups of artists, I don't have a list of all of them's name, but we worked like a dog to get that wall ready. Now, once we got the wall ready and primed, we had worked at the Southside Art Center in the back room on the table of what we was gonna put on the wall. There was some artists who never been back in the back room, but Jeff Donaldson, St. John Truth, Doug Williams, Wallace Gerald, and if I'm not mistaken, Oscar Ford, put the master plans down. Then we had to put it on the wall. We got there, we had Mitchell Catton, the late Mitchell Catton was a hell of a painter. Bill Walker, we had one other Boyd, a young man by the name of Robert Boyd, I think his name. Well, and myself, and Jeff Donaldson. So in working that way as a group, as a team, we had to rent a scaffold because we had to get up 3 flights. The first night, I never will forget, I said, well, we're gonna have to take the scaffolding down. It was heck putting it up. We had to take it down and hide it somewhere. No, just leave it here, just hook it to the bar and put the chain around it. They did it. We lost the wheels. It made it very hard for us to move the scaffolding over 400 pounds of steel scraping on the concrete. We really needed the wheels. So that helped us up until we found out that we could borrow some scaffolding material from a scaffolding place. They lent us some wheels and told us to take the wheels off each night. So we did that. Bill Walker was the head man. He was the master of the master plan. Bill Walker was there day and night. You could drive by any time. Bill Walker was sitting in the car. Bill Walker was the security man. He watched that wall as he painted. The wall changed several times. Nobody knows. I'll tell you a little secret. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad wrote a letter to me. I can't find the letter. It's somewhere lost in the archive. But he had wrote a letter to the Southside Arts Center director, which I was at the time, that he did not want to be on the wall with Malcolm X. Bill Walker had the Honorable Elijah Muhammad down on the ground floor of the mural, walking with the Fruit of Islam and the whole army of Muslims. Walking forward, you could walk right into the arms of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in real life. Bill Walker had that mural like that. Up above his head, the north end of the wall, was Malcolm X. That set it off. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad requests that he be taken off the wall or Malcolm be taken off the wall. That was a major change. Now, photographers, I don't know, Roy Lewis, there were several other photographers there that I recall, but Roy Lewis is one of them. He stayed around the wall. We had to do something about it, so we made the change. And only in the photographer world you could see that change, because there we kept it kind of down low. We didn't make no big fuss over it because we wanted Malcolm X, we wanted everybody on that wall. We wanted everybody on that wall of respect. Major, once we finished the wall, we had a dedication. Everybody, the whole community came out. It was the streets blocked off. Jim Ellis was the musician. He played his horn with the band. Lerone Bennett was the speaker. He dedicated the wall to the community with a few other dignitaries or political strategists or people who had some words to say, kind words. But it was something we gave to the community, hopefully that the gangbangers, people who lived in the community had some pride. It went on for days and days and days, and it triggered off murals, wall murals across the United States.
I actually grew up around the corner from the Wall of Respect. The Wall of Respect, I believe, was on Langley. We lived right around the corner at 44th and Champlain. And so it was basically something that we saw every day on the way to the candy store, on the way up the block or whatever. And so it was one of those things where there was painting involved and my mother wanted to be a part of it. She's not formally a member of AfriCobra per se. She was kind of busy raising her 3 children. But she saw an opportunity to do something in the neighborhood and something that involved art, and so she just jumped right on it. And so that became part of our summer. The summer of '67 was part of watching my mother up on the scaffold painting. And we even had, my brothers sort of had a little hustle where they'd hustle the tourists or people who came into the neighborhood, because there was a little pitch that they put together. You know, the wall was built in the summer of 1967. It was produced by 20 different artists, and the name of the artist was called the Abasi. And they could go into like who all the figures were on the wall, Rat Brown, Silky Carmichael, and all this. So I was all of 5, which would have put my brothers at about 6 and 7 years old. And that was like just part of growing up. Another story I have, it's a weird distinction, but I was hit by a car right in front of the wall, actually. I was getting a sucker. One of my mother's friends had given me a sucker, one of those Charm sweet and sour suckers. And I was a little smart ass as a kid. So she's like, well, who gave you the sucker? And I was like, Mama. And she took it back from me. So I had to cop a plea to get my sucker back. And I was so happy I ran off and had my sucker. And next thing I know, I was like flat on the ground. This car had like just rolled right over me. And fortunately, cars at that time were a lot higher, those big old Chevys and stuff. I mean, because I shudder to think what I would have gone through, you know, had it been a little lower to the ground. But as it was, the only thing that was broken was my sucker. And so I was really fortunate about that. But I remember, you know, my memories of that time was like, man, I didn't know that many people lived on our block. Because as I see, like, everybody just came out of the woodwork all of a sudden. You know, it was just this, you know, an event. And I remember my mother had a friend named Willie West who came down the alley. He just sort of floated out of nowhere and was like, what's going on? And he just sort of snapped to attention, sort of he parted the sea of people and got me into a car and got me to the hospital. But I walked away from it. I was fine. I was just more bewildered and just shocked because, you know, 5-year-old. So that's my wall story. My mother is Florence Hawkins. She also goes by Inyala. She went through a fairly extensive period through the 70s where she changed her name to Inyala. But nowadays she's just Flo. And she painted the basketball player that's in the bay window. Back then they used to call him Lou Alcindor, but now he's Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
When I was growing up, my parents were culture enthusiasts, and in our attic, they had posters of African American or icons, black icons, and autographed pictures of icons as well. So there were pictures of Muhammad Ali, there were pictures of Jesse Jackson, there were pictures of Patricia Harris, who I think was my dad's boss at the time, and there were pictures from Roots. You know, there was this one big art depiction in the first episode of Roots where I think Kunta Kinte's dad holds him up and says, the only thing greater than yourself, or behold the only thing greater than yourself, and it's the father holding up his son. And so our attic, you know, was this collector's hovel, so to speak. It was a museum of sorts. And my dad used to say, this is the wall of respect, okay? So every time they would meet another famous person, someone who was really significant, they would put their autographed picture and put their poster up in the attic. And, you know, whenever we go to attic and we could find, you know, a lot of our books about history and culture, and we would see all these autographs and photos. So years later, I realized there was actually a wall of respect that this wall of respect in my home inspired. And I always thought that was really special because, you know, it was a continuation. It was taking that wall of respect, putting it in our home. My uncle also had a wall of respect. I think they might have had a battle of walls of respect. But it was all inspired by the actual wall of respect. And I just think that it was very special that was brought into our home. And that was something that I had an opportunity to grow up with.
Has the Black Arts Movement been unsung in the goals of freedom and respect for all African Americans?
No, no. There is no movement that can happen without art. You can't, because what you gonna look at? The artists are always there on the front lines. I don't care where it is. I mean, that's what Margaret Burroughs went down to Mexico to learn. You know, they all the Mexican printmakers down there, you know, fighting against social injustice, you know, in labor issues. No, there is no movement without the art. You can't have it. It's not possible. You know what I mean? What's it gonna be like? Just like in a corner somewhere? It's just like, you know, I mean, it's a part of a strategy, it's part of a plan, but there is no. That's how you get people excited. That's why the Wall of Respect was brilliant. That's why Afro-Cobra is brilliant. Like, how do you get people excited? You put them bright ass colors on people gonna get excited. You know, it's like, yeah, they like, no, we use Kool-Aid colors. We use bright colors. And they learned that from looking at what people respond to the most. Like, you know, and no. I think it's been sung. Any time you see anything about any type of movement with black civil rights, you see an artist to go with it. You see an image to go with it, a photograph to go with it. Who documents it? The artists are the ones that are there. There is no movement. You know, if it's not written about or documented, it didn't happen. So the photographers, you know, the painters, the writers, there is no movement without them. Like, which is why when we did the demise,
Yes.
that's why I was trying to get all of them different. I realized I'm gonna get a writers guild. I'm gonna get the writers back in here. We're gonna, you know, that was all these strategies, like understanding the things that we naturally do. Like, we just know how to do it. Like, you know, Tony's like, you know how to do stuff, right? And I knew the way it looked and how it was supposed to be done because I've seen other people do it. I just wasn't able to articulate the strategy. And that's what, the time I had at school, I was able to like, oh, right, oh, there's a pattern here. There's a way to get things done, you know.
Well, the Wall of Respect, just recently, a friend of mine, her name is Drea, who teaches, and she says, you gotta be a part of this, you gotta be a part of this, you know? And, but you know, she's always been interested in various cultures, doing various things, you know, bringing that truth thing out. But, you know, I'm a child of the 60s. I remember walking around here in Chicago, when the gangs, the Peace Stone Rangers and all, the gangs were walking the streets over near, I think, at Hyde Park. But anyway, I also attended Southern Illinois University, and that's just like being in Chicago yourself, because at that time, I had never, I mean, I flunked out of Millikan University. Well, never. I didn't flunk out. I was kind of kicked out, you know. I was the only black in the entire school. Well, there was 7 of us, you know, but I felt like I was the only one. Anyway, from Millikan, I went to Southern Illinois. And I began to hear about these artists in Chicago, you know, Afro Cobra and groups of artists in Chicago that were doing certain things that had something in common. There was, whether it was color, canvas, always flat, deep, darkish, earth-like, earth tone colors, and if it wasn't a representation or figural, then it was semi or very African influenced. Well, me with my Uncle Tom ass, I was like, I don't want to do this, you know. We have that thing of not wanting to be associated with your own people back then, you know, wearing our hair a certain way, walking, talking, trying to move away from that, very ashamed of being black. I was caught up into that, and I wanted to be more. So I ignored the black art that was coming out of the South Side, and I was, you know, wanting to be like David Smith, and I wanted to be like the white artists, the European artists. I wanted to be a part of that. I even wanted to talk, to look, to walk, to act, and to go through the whole educational process to be someone else that I was not. And all the while this was happening within me, within my brain, this art just kept on, this black art that took place, you know, over on the South Side, it kept moving. I mean, people like Richard Mayhew, you know, and a lot of women. And this is one thing that we tend to forget. Women leading the art movement. Marva and I'm not a good name dropper, but most of these movements, like all movements, were led by women. You know, they were the first. So it kept its pace, it kept its rhythm, it kept up this searching, this process, and never wavering, you know. And I talked to Joyce Owens about this a lot, you know, and she was younger than I, of course, but how people like myself, many of us, well, I don't say many, but few of us who were in the arts, how we sort of sidestepped. And it was Isabel Neal, who has a gallery. She kind of turned me around. She says, look, you know, she had a gallery here in Chicago. She says, you don't have to be someone you're not. You don't have to be of a certain, or to practice and teach and express certain mannerisms that you're not really that familiar with, therefore making it rather clumsy. She says, I have a black art gallery. They never open the doors to you, and they never will. And this is just how it is. It's not that I'm out complaining. If you want something, you do it yourself. You open up your own gallery. And here it is, the Isabel Neal Gallery, right in the heart of Chicago, doing very well. And also Mrs. Madeline, who has she had her gallery at that time, a little bit younger than us, but she was also doing the same thing. But I came up here and I discovered there's more of this art coming out of the South Side that's kicking, you know? I mean, really saying, shouting stuff. I mean, you pick up the Muslim newspaper, African American Muslim, Muhammad Speaks, and you can see artwork. You can see cartoons, you know, and I didn't make these distinctions, you know, or separations between. I mean, it was artwork. There was language written. There was a culture that I never knew of. Brought up in an integrated environment all my life, right from the get-go. But there was something that was wrong with it because it wasn't integrated. It was segregated. I was just too fucked up to realize that it was segregated, you know? But the art persisted, and there was that movement, you know, Afro Cobra and other groups of artists. Southside Museum, you know, was bringing art to us. Over in Hyde Park, there was another venue for Black artists, and I began to fall in love with myself, you know. That damn, when I went to Southern, brothers really turned me around. I mean, you know, guys that are in my classes come telling me that, look, you don't have to do the white thing. You know, you can do the black thing. Brothers showed up in hats called Big Apples back then, cocked to the side, you know, and sisters had their hair fixed in their own makeup and wearing African garb and stuff, you know. And I'd come down there, you know, playing Gloria, you know, singing that stuff, you know, Gloria, and the guys grabbed me and said, you just don't have to do this, be yourself. And that was an education in itself. And I came back and I taught at the Art Institute, and slowly I began to discover, I mean, not to recognize, but to actually discover African American art that was a movement, that is a movement. It's just persistent, it leaks, it drips, you know, but water will dissolve a rock if it keeps dripping on it, you know. So that's what the African movement, African American art movement means to me here in Chicago.
From the Wall of Respect to, you know, some of the finest graffiti that's done today, it says that we are not afraid, that we have a voice that will be heard, that deserves to be heard, that this is an art of the people, by the people, for the people, that there is an inherent sense of expression that manifests beauty across all economic strata. We are here, we have something to say that's vital, and it's a legacy that will be continued. I would love to see a Wall of Respect too as a continuum with contemporary ideas and voices across generations led by our youth. I think practice is through participation, and the word is powerful only because it's backed up by the action. So that's what, you know, I would see. I think with the advent of technology and crowdfunding, we have opportunities to reinvent the ways in which we support, both from media and from money, from economics. We can innovate, invent new possibilities of support for high-level Black arts, as well as arts in general, expression. I think it's time for the world to recognize that artists have great utility, that they are extremely purposeful for inspiring a better way of life, of enhancing our thought process, of touching our hearts, our minds, our spirits, and to see ways in which there is positive, progressive, and innovative remuneration for jobs well done. Obviously, in terms of the Black Arts Movement, the job was well done. In the future, we have to figure out a new balance, our own value system within this economic strata, where we see ways in which we can respect, wall of respect. We need a spirit of respect with a new community collaboration and involvement that would engage and inspire our youth, no matter what direction of career, such as artists, that they will have an opportunity to thrive in their lifetime and work also for those to thrive in the future through the arts. That is the wall of respect.
And it was just the most incredible experience of my life. It was transformative. My time with Jeff Donaldson at that time. And through that, he was talking about the wall of respect. He gave me the positive, the negative, the whole, a lot of the energy. It was kind of in the process of happening, because later Nelson took our class to see the wall of respect. And we all went and spent the whole, as a field trip, we came down from Northern and spent the day with at the Wall of Respect. We were supposed to meet with Richard Hunt, but we didn't, he was away when we got to the studio, but I met Napoleon Jones Henderson, I went to Art Gallery. The class went on this like field trip here into the bowels of, you know, the people who were working on the Wall of Respect and some of the artists that were there. And, but to go back to the interview, I learned so much, and like it was that day it was like why I wanted to be an artist became crystal clear. You know, this is something I can do for my people, this is something I can do for culture. I love art. He was, you know, he broke it down in how our role as the cultural vanguard. We are part of the Black Power movement. We are helping to make the stuff that will survive, because our culture is who we are. And that's, you know, I was reading Mao and all the things that culture and people and revolution are about. It was tied up in, you know, that afternoon's interview. And I had questions for him, and he just was just really open, and he was just a brilliant man. I was like on my knees listening to him. And it was, at the same interview, he invited me to participate in Confaba, which was a conference on the functional aspects of Black art, at which Elizabeth Catlett was going to be the keynote speaker. So Confaba, if I stumble on some of the personnel there, it was Barry Gaither was on the task force that I got to sit upon. I should have tried to pull out some literature on that, but at any rate, here you have scholars, academicians, and artists coming together to discuss how our art can have a role for our Black children in education, in the community, how it can serve this revolution in a way. The functional aspects of Black art, how we're going to move it forward is not going to be in the same paradigm that white art or the establishment art is. Black artists at the time weren't even being considered to be, you know, collected, or, I mean, times have changed so since those 60s in terms of one level of acknowledgement from the quote art established world. And this was what Black art had to be. It had to be defined in its own self to make itself relevant to what it served. And what it was serving for the revolution was, the revolution, or what would be 7 generations down the road, our people. It was from Jeff and that conference, my philosophy in art and education was worked on and grew. I was saying earlier, art should define, identify, and direct. Define who we are for ourselves, identify ourselves and identify our values, identify things that are key to who we are, and then direct us to solution, to higher thinking, to our best humanity. So those are the things I learned through that kind of participation, and the people who were involved at the time were just giants. Like I said, Jacob Lawrence, Elizabeth Catlett couldn't get a visa to participate in them, so we had to hear her keynote over the phone long distance at the time. And Jeff was like really concerned that, just because he had gone through the wall of respect, and we're in a revolution. I mean, the revolution was happening in '67 and '66, and it was an arena of people that came through Chicago, like Haki, that were organizing and doing things and providing cultural stimulation for people. That I was just on the scene. I was there. I was, Barbara Ann Tears, who was a theater person, Amira Baraka, the Last Poets, the Pharaohs, a lot of major Black arts personnel came through Chicago in those times, or I was exposed to either through Nelson and through being a student in that era. And I was just trying to soak it all up. The Wall of Respect, we were schooled on it before we came, because it was going to be a field trip that we were going to do other things at. And Jeff met us there to explain how the project got started. He was working with Obasi. At the time, this was a collective, I think Hoyt Fuller, Haki was a part of Obasi, but some of the founders of it were Hoyt and William Walker, who's a painter and muralist of phenomenal stature in Chicago. Gwendolyn Brooks, Carolyn Rogers, some of the giant writers and poets at the time were part of Obasi, but they had a visual arts arm that Jeff started to organize. Jay Jarrell, I believe, and Wadsworth were also connected with it, and Barbara Jones as a student got involved. And Jeff and William Walker came together to really structure it and bring people in and discuss the kinds of imagery that was going to be a part of it and why it was going to be. I know Nelson told me to say that this is what he learned from Jeff, that the mural movement was like creating stained glass windows for our community. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, yeah, we think about a sacred place, and our people are going to need some places that are sacred. And the whole process of putting up the wall brought that home in terms of creating a sacred space. Jeff would talk about how this building was under fire and the people in the community had kind of donated it to do it. The space, the area in the neighborhood was, you know, a live neighborhood right off of 47th Street. there were a lot of street activities going on, but once they started doing the mural, the space became really important. The community started interacting. What you doing here? Why? What's going on? And they would explain their mission and why they're doing it. We're putting up a wall of respect. We've identified some imagery that we think people want will reflect us and show people who we respect and what we are respecting. So we needed input and that kind of thing. So I want to say looking back on how the artists and the space and the people in that community interacted was, I think, part of being in the revolution. You are trying to be out there and change ideas or interact with people to find out what's important to them, why it is. And I know Sin Stack and Roy, who were photographers on the project, they were there catching a lot of the interaction. There was interaction with the gangs. I can't tell you which ones were there. It was probably the Blackstone Rangers. And a lot of that energy was happening. But it became, safe for anybody in the community. The gangs made they got to know the people who were working on the mural and put the word out. At the same time, the city officials, the police, the FBI, folks were seeing black people collect and congregate and get along and not fight. So something suspicious is happening, and there was people, and Jeff was like the very paranoid, not paranoid, but cautiously aware that that kind of activity is going on. So there would be people, FBI or police informants or folks trying to find something to bring the project down, but they couldn't.
The city saw the unity of the people coming together from the Wall of Respect, Daley, Richard J. Daley, and they couldn't seemingly tolerate or want to see happen black people coming together in community. So they couldn't wait. So they created legitimate excuses to destroy the building that the wall was painted on. So as soon as they could, I can't remember the years, it wasn't that many years that the wall lasted. So they came to destroy to tear the building down. So then there was a movement, I think, led by Bill, because he always possessed this art and took ownership and got involved in political activism through the arts. And so initially, it wasn't on good texture, good form, good quality. It was just something on a wall, a building, but it wasn't, on boards or anything. Some of the windows were because they'd been boarded up. But so but the black whole city, almost the black world, came together over the Wall of Respect. And so they had the wall taken down in pieces and moved to Malcolm X College. Malcolm X College at that time was the prototype community college in the black community. And all over America, Malcolm X became the preeminent black college because it was named after Malcolm, who was very prolific at that time as the black hero, and have a college named after his name. And Dr. Hearst, who was the president at that time, was very community active. So the Wall of Respect created a arm, a shoulder, a force in the black arts community, that black people's art is important and significant and must be respected. And also the Wall of Respect created an antagonism with the political white community who did not want to see black people coming together, particularly over art expression. And actually, it appears that so they tried to destroy the Wall of Respect. It was taken to Malcolm X. And then it appears that because of that coming together, unity over the art, that there was a strong move by the city, this Chicago, to take arts out of the public schools, because it was a way of us being in love with ourselves as a people, creating pride with us, with what we produced as art form that became visible to the nation. And people from all over would come to the wall, and for the little time it lasted, just to partake in it, just to see it. And then I said, move to the alley, and people from all over the world would come and hang out in the alley. And it was a spiritual rejuvenation aspect of tribes, of our people coming together, representing pride throughout America. And it actually ignited what we call a black arts movement throughout America, or the mural movement throughout America. And other aspects have taken over, have gotten involved, other communities. So it's been from the black community to the Hispanic to the white community to get involved with art, with public art.
Is there a difference between black pride and civil rights in Chicago? I'm going to say, of course there is. However, you can't really have one without the other. Okay? So we are a country that is made up of a lot of different people. And so we could talk about civil rights, and actually some of us would not include black folk. And so that's why I'm saying that there's a difference in the two. That is why we had the movement that we had, when we had to go through these stages of recognition, of importance of who we are, black power. It really didn't mean that we were going to, well, maybe in some cases, but it really didn't mean that we were going around going to kill everybody that didn't look like us. But it meant that we had a stake in this country, and we had a stake to be respected as a people. And so it was important for a race of people that was stripped of everything, that had no power, to understand that it was necessary to have some. And so they need to come together and be as one, because civil rights means that your God-given right to be able to live freely and live amongst other people. But in that too, we must be recognized for our worth. What I don't like is when people say, I'm colorblind, I don't see color. I'm going, really? Well, that's disrespectful too. Because if you don't see who I am for all of what I am, then you're not giving me my self-worth. I want you to see my dark skin. I want you to see my broad nose. I want you to see my dark eyes and my kinky hair. What I don't want you to do is then see it in a negative light, or think poorly of me because of what you see. Because you do see with your eyes. I recognize when someone has straight hair. I recognize when someone has slanted eyes. I recognize when someone has keen features, or a broad nose, or full lips, or thin. But what I don't do is try to judge them inadvertently or adversely because of what they look like. So there is a difference between black and civil rights, but we need to be able to make sure that they blend and no one is being disrespected and ignored as a result of that. The Wall of Respect is revolutionary. And public art and putting murals where a lot of people can see it is revolutionary, because revolutionary just means change. Now, public art is not something that is foreign to our ancient culture, our African culture, because art is integrated throughout everything that we do in terms of our heritage. And art has purpose as it relates to our heritage. It teaches us how to interact with individuals. It teaches us different traditions and the way that we should behave. So public art, however, in America is different in this country, and it does make a statement. It makes a few statements. One of the statements is just kind of simplistic. It's beautifying. It's making what maybe was a little dull or could be missed more prominent, and that's important. And it also can speak to a point in time where conversation can happen and communication can happen. So public art can change one's life that way because it generates a visceral reaction and it makes people want to delve a little deeper, whether into the art itself and what it's saying, whether about the artist who did the work. And often the public art is speaking of the community in which it is sitting in. And so that gives you another depth and an area in which to explore.
When I look at the larger social implications of what we've done with digital media and now, well, television and all, then it's easy to understand that back in that day, the images of African Americans would have been entirely in negative contexts. There was virtually no context that I can quite imagine, or certainly not more than one, in which African Americans were seen as a positive aspect of a complex culture. And I think that what the Wall of Respect did was to insist that there were artists and individuals and creative people who were part of a vital creative culture that deserved respect. There's a slight distinction between the usual use of community art and what the Wall of Respect was done. Community art is often a little more about the artist being turned toward the community in the planning stages, and then sometimes working with the community, sometimes without working with the community in the later stages. That's a slightly newer version of the work that was inspired by the Wall of Respect, which was, I will carefully characterize, given my absence of experience of it directly, but it seemed to be about artists who knew their community and knew that there was images and ideas and representations of their community that were missing, that were positive and important images, and that they really just determined that those images should be out there even if there was not easy public support for it on a larger scale. So I think that what happens is that artists on one hand have, in that case, determined to represent to the community aspects of creative culture in African American life. I think that what's also come from it is a sense that artists and communities are each creative and each communicate and each collaborate and each insist on voice and vision and capacity, and that creative exchange between artist and community is what's so remarkable about it. The murals in Chicago, no matter where they were located, were easily influenced by the artists of the Harlem Renaissance. The forms of collage, the kinds of color schemes, but mostly the shifts in scale and the shifts of different levels of representation are really different than what you saw in murals in New York or San Francisco or LA, the other places where the mural movement had some early traction. And that I think that when you look around at Chicago's murals, there is a look to them which is not usually understood by younger artists to have been informed by the Harlem Renaissance, that nonetheless I see in pieces like all of the work that Mitchell Catton and Calvin Jones did, an extraordinary collaboration of representation and abstraction, of form and content, of style and structure that is really, really remarkable. And I think that kind of work, especially the work of the two of them, has been just richly informing to generations of artists who simply saw their work on the wall from decades before. I think that it's really important for there to be an aspect of the commemoration which is very rooted in artists, and I'll even say African American artists in this particular case, to create work near the original location, since it can't be at the exact location, but to create work which reflects contemporary values, contemporary understandings, practice, techniques, materials, I don't care, but that would be an affirmation of the complexity of artistic expression and cultural and racial understanding that people would have. I think that's what the wall was about, and to do an aspect of that today would be really important. Related to that is that I think that it's a form which other communities and other artists and artists on teams that cross race and cross gender and cross age and cross style and histories can be equally astonishing for the work that would get done. Because when artists genuinely collaborate, respectively, and when artists work with the community, whatever that community is, sort of geographic or racial or a community of conscience, that there's an extraordinary exchange in which everybody is richer in knowledge, richer in understanding, richer in images, and it makes us all wealthier. Not precisely wealthier in the pocketbook, though that's a nice thing, but wealthier in the form of our understanding of the complexity of life.
I would definitely say that the Black Arts Movement has a song, and is not unsung. Have powers that be controlling opinion strategically deterred the song. That is more of the issue. Without commercial media, the Black arts expression has gone all over the world. Now, has there been a democratic celebration, an optimistic, tolerant acceptance? No. Historically, anything outside of the European aesthetic has been demoted to less value, demoted to less attention. One of the tragedies that even many from the community have desired more than necessary the opinion and the approval of the imperialist. There are many African Americans of means, of economic means, that have not innovated an endowment in order to promote, protect, and celebrate Black arts, period. Being that African Americans are a part of this country, there has been an unfair and strategic demotion to the value of the contributions of Black arts to the aesthetic of the society. So, in spite of all of that, the song has been heard. And it will, there's a law in physics, energy cannot be destroyed. This is real energy. It will receive its due sooner than later, I hope. But for all those that expressed what they knew was right, what they believed, and that they were inspired to do, that energy is not for naught. That energy is appreciated by many. And we will collectively find ways to acknowledge, recognize, salute, and celebrate the unseen and the unknown effort.
What statement is made when community art is designed in a public space like the Wall of Respect?
I think it says that a community cares. It wants to have something that brings beauty to their community, but more importantly, something that was didactic, that would teach a lesson. You could go around the corner and see a picture of Nina Simone or Lou Alcindor or Malcolm X or someone like that. And so that idea that we wanted to reach out and show our young people these role models. I think that says a lot about what the community had in mind. Keep in mind, too, that this was also a time where you're looking at movements not only like Operation Breadbasket, but the Panthers were kind of in their nascent form. And one of the things that we always remember is that they had breakfast programs. So, for whatever people want to say about this movement or that movement, these were groups that came into the community and actually did something. They weren't just making gestures at social problems. They wanted to do something constructive. So I see the Wall as part of that continuum. These were people that wanted to put something, that had a lesson.
Is it revolutionary?
Sure it is. Sure it is. When you're taking, what basically a relatively raggedy neighborhood, poor people who have just decided, it wasn't like they had a CAP grant to do this or anything, or that they got, a MacArthur grant to go into their communities and do this. This was very grassroots. It wasn't, at least the way I saw it, wasn't super organized or anything, but it's just people that wanted to pitch in and wanted to do change from their little sphere of the world. So yeah, the idea of taking your children's education, even through something like that, in your own hands, that's a step in the right direction, because where else were we going to get that Black history? You remember, Black history was just a week back then. I think we were still Negro right about that time too.
We started as Negroes and we ended up as Black, because we went through something and we're thinking about ourselves. And so the visual arts, the musical arts, the literary arts, all those things were addressing that, throwing those questions out there all the time. That was important outcome of that time period. And then I can see that the larger society then responds to that and then quickly tries to nullify those types of effects, and also nullify the ability for you to ever do that again, because of the power that the arts had in helping us redefine ourselves. Now, you brought up a lot of things of sophistication with art. I want to get this in there. I believe that our visual arts culture is very, very new, young, and we tend to utilize or bring in concepts of evaluation of what we're doing from another visual arts culture, a Western visual arts culture, a European visual arts culture. And then we keep comparing and evaluating ours and saying, we are not this, we're not that, and we're so forth, and you need to do. No, we don't. Ours is new. We're making our culture, our visual arts culture. The Wall of Respect was a sort of like an early attempt at saying, in the public domain, this is what the community wants to do, or wants to say, or responds to. And then you see that it took off and went across the world. But here the community, a community that is repressed and constrained, now has an opportunity to put something out there, and this is who we are, this is what we think is important. All right, this is an early step in the process. If you look at Western culture, yeah, they've been doing this. All right, but I'm not going to compare the two. So even in the homes, when people say that I'm not a sophisticated collector, I'm like, you got to be kidding. We haven't had enough time for us to have developed a concept that, oh, this is what a sophisticated collector in our visual culture should do because we've got 500 years of experience with that. No, we don't. We're just starting. So get off of that. I tell people that, stop doing that. So we can make our own concepts of what is good. This is how we do it, so forth. Instead of borrowing inappropriately from somebody else. We're asking kind of like, what was the impact of these people that were involved in the Wall of Respect and the Black Arts Movement and so forth. And I think that there's the immediate impact right then, and then now we're 50 years on, and people are looking back on it and saying, oh, that was really very powerful. That was very powerful. And that's the part that I feel like I have an obligation and responsibility now, is that I'm an art collector now, after being bombarded by artists that I've interacted with for over 40-something years, and they kept telling me that you are an art collector, you are an art collector, and I finally accepted it around the end of the 1990s, early part of 2000. I said, okay, yes, I'm an art collector. Now, once you accept that within our, as I said, developing visual arts culture, comes responsibilities and obligations. An art appreciator, art collector has responsibilities to the collective, to the people, which that if you're functioning, you're collecting, appreciating, preserving artwork, all that, you have responsibilities. It is not just about you. So that's why the organization was formed, Diasporisms, but it also has said, Patrick, you now have to be involved in all of the different types of things that deal with further developing the visual arts culture. And so when you see things like the Wall of Respect, the concept of public art in art in the public domain, and the activities of furthering the importance of that, holding it up for critical analysis, that you have to step up and be a part of it. When Jeff Donaldson died, we had a tribute to him in 2005 in Chicago. And our organization was new, and we immediately started contacting all the people that were associated, that we knew were associated with AfriCobra and Jeff Donaldson and the Wall of Respect and so forth. And we conducted interviews with those people so that we could document, and well, we were putting together a tribute for Jeff here in Chicago. I learned a lot about the Wall of Respect during that activity. And I got to talk to people who were actually involved. And then when you start opening up the question of who actually worked on it, you start finding out all of these people that you did not know, you know, because like I said, I really wasn't right there at the time that they were doing, but I now recognize I know a whole lot of people that were involved with it. So we did that, and then in part of doing that, we found out that there were people who were directly affected as artists by the AfriCobra movement, and then they started movements of their own and interactions like Tertel and Dalton Brown and so forth, the Black Artists Guild and so forth. So I started finding out that, oh, that's a connection to that, and here, these are some of the same people I'm now interacting with.
Your hero and your shero has to have done something heroic. All right? If you haven't done anything heroic, you're not a hero. Okay, being a fan of an entertainer, if you're putting up a wall of entertainment value, then that's what you do. Okay? All right? Clergy, politicians, whatever you've done, but you're talking about being heroic. Muhammad Ali was the anchor in the Wall of Respect's design. Because A, Cassius Clay, when Negroes were aggressively Christian, partnered with Malcolm X and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and said, you know what, changing my name, Ali. That was the beginning of what now you will say is Shaniqua, Taisha, Malik Jamal, meaning us using Eastern and Africanized names. He's heroic because he threw down the gauntlet against all costs to himself. Okay, all costs to himself. Add to it, what'd he say? Ain't no Vietnamese ever called me nigger, so he wasn't going to Vietnam. That's heroic. What did they do? Strip, dudes, you can't box. Strip, it ain't happening. Okay? He took the heat. That's heroic. I ain't talking about his personal life. I ain't talking about inviting him over for some carrot juice. I'm talking about that. Heroic. So if you're talking about heroes, you got to be at that level. You got a shero? Okay. Well, Harriet Tubman, Mary Lou Farmer. They did things that no one had done. And at great risk, but of great benefit to everybody that came next. Being an entertainer after Motown and Stax has dominated the music industry, and now the powers to be have put you in a spot where you can make endless amounts of money by just fitting in the spot, I don't know if that's heroic. So I think at every generation, and I think sometimes we need to take the ageism and the generation thing out, because if you're a hero for all time. You're not just a hero like fashion. You're a hero for all time. And there are a lot of heroes out here. I think about Ben Carson, the brain surgeon. You know, if you got a kid that's traumatized with seizures and this guy cultivates the technology to go in the dome and take out a big chunk of the brain for your child to be normal, I think that's a hero. Because, look, I got problems cutting paper, least of all cutting through somebody's skull and doing that. I know that ain't me. And he does it with a smile, and he's got a high success rate. So when we're talking about being heroic, we need to talk about what is a hero. I think one thing that happens in our culture, we make the mistake of thinking entertainers are heroes. Because there was a time that some entertainers did things that were heroic. It wasn't all of them. Like when the Wall of Respect hit, I ain't gonna name names, but there were certain black entertainers that when they were in Chicago would get in their limo and drive by the Wall of Respect and be totally pissed that they weren't on that wall. And these people were high profile entertainers. We all know their names, but they didn't make the cut because at that time, they didn't fit the agenda of the emerging black consciousness movement. Now, number two, when you ask about School of the Art Institute, which I went to twice, and I'm all about that school, but it was an autonomous decision making. It wasn't enabled by outsiders. See, the interesting thing about the black cultural movement, it was internal. It came from within, and then it went out. It wasn't, well, can we get funding? And you know, we want to give you some propositions, and what name are you going to underwrite, and will you give us what? It wasn't that. It was thinking from within. The idea of a black consciousness and Africanized thought was a new way of thinking and doing. So if there's going to be another Wall of Respect, to me, you need to get the best of the graffiti people that nobody knows who they are, and somebody that could work and coalesce with that and have a standards of sheroes, heroes, based on a criterion. Make the cut. Not I like you. Not I like you, I don't like you. See, we function in this, if I like you, you're so cool, you can't do nothing wrong. But if I don't like you, you could be dope, but I hate you and you ain't gonna make the cut. When you got a criterion, that person's a hero. When you integrate a sport and people are spitting on you and people threatening your mama and people gonna kill you, that's heroic. Now after that's done and you come 40 years later and you got a multi-million-dollar contract, you're a good employee. There's a big difference. Everybody love your mama. Oh, baby, your baby's blah, blah. Everybody love you, okay? They put her on the show and, you know, all this. So, criterion, for all of time, those that take that first hit, they're heroes on a timeless level. because time always will hit you. Okay, and one of the things that is stagnated in our commerce development is that you're talking massive wealth that was in the black community. Dempsey Travis, John H. Johnson, George Johnson, Lee Trotter, the Fuller Empire, Ed Gardner. There was a lot of autonomous monies. Okay, so I say Harold Washington makes the cut. You know, he probably makes the cut. Margaret Burroughs makes the cut. She wasn't on the first wall, but you're gonna do another wall. I say those two gotta be on the wall, okay? Margaret, her needs for being an artist and creating a space for artists led to the DuSable Museum, and I know when I was a teenager, I used to volunteer in the basement over there and listen to her and Charlie talk about it. So there's something heroic. Harold took on the total machine, turned it around, and laid the template for what is now President Obama. And not to mention the palace he left behind, the Harold Washington Library. So you got two people that from within coalesced a variety of resources and left massive institutions, DuSable Museum for Margaret Burroughs, Dr. Margaret Burroughs, and the Harold Washington Library from the late Mayor Harold Washington. So to me, if those two don't start the wall, then you ain't got a wall. Not a wall of respect. You might have a billboard for entertainers.
Well, my place and time in AfriCobra was like a hallmark in my life. I'll put it that way. You know, there are times when you're growing up, the first day you enter school, the day you graduate from high school, and the day somebody accepts you in AfriCobra. Well, the Wall of Respect represents a grassroots effort to make a statement. I can remember, see, I had just gotten out of the Army in 1966. And when I found a little place to live, it was in this area somewhere, and I would go to the beach and hear the AACM free concerts. I just found myself, this is the beginning of what heaven should be for somebody coming of age. And like I said, this was part of the Renaissance movement. Sam Greenlee's book turned into a movie somewhere in that same period, and he come out of the Obasi movement. AfriCobra, we had several of the founders of AfriCobra had participated in that Wall of Respect. And when I saw it, and remember, the biggest figure in the world in terms of visibility was Muhammad Ali. And he has center stage on that wall with his arms raised. So when I saw that and all the other people on the wall, I thought the Wall of Respect was one of the more phenomenal things the visual artist could do. And I was very disappointed when there's only photographs left. Right, the building's torn down or whatever. But it started the mural movement here in Chicago, right? Restarted mural movement. I mean, murals have been around for forever, but in the general public, we didn't see a lot of that until after that Wall of Respect. You know, I can't say that people outside of this general area and on down to 43rd, I don't know how many people outside this area would come down just to see the Wall of Respect. I mean, it's just a picture on the wall for a lot of people. Okay, but for the people in the neighborhood, this was our thing. This was ours. And the artists may have come from far and wide to participate, much like the artists doing the Bronzeville photo. But I can't say people from the west side and the far south that weren't involved in the art would come down and look at the wall.
The artists were definitely a tight-knit group of men. My father, for example, was real good friends with Wadsworth Gerald. They were so close that they'd stay out all night, come in, and I'd wake up in the morning as a kid, and Wadsworth Gerald would be sleeping on the would sleep. I find them sleep on the couch in our living room. I mean, they were very close. A lot of times, right after a long day at an art fair, they go down to on Stony Island on soul food restaurants, and have a meal, have a bite to eat. Doug Williams, some of the other artists, he would hang out. They were really close. And the gentlemen, I mean, to this day, even though my father's deceased, I still keep up with Boswell Gerald. I went to his house with my wife and daughter and his wife. We talked for 2 or 3 hours. He was telling me about what he was doing. He's got a book coming up on Afro-Cobra. He's talking about some chapters he was going to include about the Wall of Respect. And so, I mean, it's like their own world. They're all these men are very dedicated. Margaret Burroughs, I think the last gallery show she did was at my dad's gallery, Parish Gallery in Georgetown. And I remember going to her home. This is when I was working as a night editor at the Sun-Times, going to her home and grabbing her work, so taking pictures with my cell phone camera so my dad could see, email it to him so he could see what she was working on. And of course, with Ms. Burroughs, it was never just that. She said, "Well, come on, why don't you do me a favor? Let's run down to the Sabo." She'd ever grab some paintings and bring it down to the Sabo, and so she can archive it. I got this good deal. There was a painting on the 1800s just sitting around in the corner of the closet of her home. And then after that, I had to go take her shopping at a grocery store. So they were pretty close knit of people. And they actually walked the talk. Like, for example, Miss Burroughs, she had several people, or a few people who were homeless who lived with her. And my dad, to the end, he died from brain cancer, and it took some of his ability to use his right arm. And to paint, toward the end, my dad would take his right arm, and he basically would hold his arm and paint with that. So, I mean, these men were very dedicated. My dad he didn't look at just normal sitcoms and television. It was always like MSNBC. It was news programming. And toward the end, because he couldn't do too much, I remember he wouldn't even have the TV. I said, "There's nothing I can do right now to really help people." So he said, "I don't want to even look at TV," because he felt like if he saw something on TV that he had to be part of a solution. And so basically he listened to jazz music. I would get jazz music and put it in a CD, and that's how he lived his final days. But anyway, the artists were very close. They knew each other very well. It was pretty much like an extended family.
And while I was at IIT, that's where I met Jeff Donaldson, and I met Barbara Jones-Hagu, and other people who were also either working for the board at that time and involved in a special program there, or they were somehow working on their degrees. So once I made contact with Jeff Donaldson, things really seemed to open up, because he was involved in doing his doctorate. So he got me involved in Obasi, and then from there, he also invited me and asked me to come over and work on the Wall of Respect. A lot had gone on at that time, so I was not very aware of the relationships and some of the misunderstandings maybe between artists that had occurred. But I just remember Jeff standing up and say, "Well, Carolyn, why don't you go over there and work with Bill on his section of the wall?" And so I did, and it was just such an exciting time for me, having come from a city where I was totally unaware of other other black artists, except the ones that were at Texas Southern University. I was just wild. Well, not wild. I was just. It's just hard to explain the feeling of seeing so many other creative people who were serious about their art. In fact, it was, the art was just an integral part of who they were. It was not like they were somebody doing art. They were truly the artist, the creator, it was their expression. And then the atmosphere, that the community, people just talking and coming and going, and just ordinary working people and ordinary people not working were so involved in everything that was going on. It's just like they had always been there, but all of a sudden there was a spotlight that had been put on them, and for the first time they felt important, necessary. They felt that they had value, not only on the block, but to other people in other institutions, other organizations, and they were just full of energy. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where there was so much energy. And Bill was just a wonderful person. He spoke to me and worked with me as if I was completely capable of doing anything that he wanted done. And we had very good communication. He could talk to me and explain it with very few words, and I understood exactly what it was he was trying to do. He was, I felt, a very kind and easy person to be around.
Well, when I went to Kenwood, and I had my art class, she was my art teacher, and it's the first time I actually had an art class or any type of art teacher outside of like my dad and my mom shooting me a couple of tips. But like when I first met her, like all the same, she's a teacher. So, you know, I'm 15 years old and all the rest of the kids is cutting up in class. Cause I mean, this art class, like, you know, nobody, unless you like to draw, like no one's really paying attention and stuff, man. And like, you know, she's going through fundamentals and basics of like art history and like, you know, all these different things and stuff, man. And we're like, whatever, you know. And so like, I was pretty much kind of like, I fell in the suit only because I was so into graffiti. And like, if it wasn't graffiti, I just wasn't really checking for it. And I did a couple of assignments in her class, and she kind of noticed right away that, you know, my interest in art, my work kind of proved through. And so she kind of was on me. Because what I would do is, anytime we had an art project to come up, because I ended up taking a class all 4 years, you know, I'll procrastinate, but like I knew, okay, man, we have a project, everybody else working on their stuff for a week, I'd knock it out the hour before the class, and like I was, you know, the work would look good, but she knew I BS'd it, man, like she knew. And so like she would give my butt about it, and like my mom, man, she's an art teacher too, and you know, she got Miss Lawrence information, and like they'd be on the phone talking for hours and stuff, man, like I be in my room and she going off about me. All you hear is, yeah, I know, girl. All right, that's all I hear. You know, man, I was like, ah, shit, man. But as I got older and I got to she put me in an AP art class, and I started focusing more so on like actual like elements of just drawing and the fundamentals of painting and things like that. That's when I started to realize like and appreciate her as an art teacher, and like when you know that your teacher cares about you and what you're doing, that's when it starts to click a little bit more, and kind of like that knuckleheaded stuff kind of runs its course or whatever. So and Ms. Lawrence, one thing I gotta say about Ms. Lawrence, patience, man, cause man, like I went off to go teach after as I got older and stuff with teenagers, and man, like Lord help me, man, patience. Like she had it, cause I just say it a couple of times, man, with like kids in class, and man, they test any teacher and stuff, man. But I always would think about my mom, and I had to show Miss Lawrence some respect, man. Like I wouldn't want nobody jumping up talking to my mom crazy like that. And plus, like she's here for us, Even though I was a teenager, I realized that, as I became a upperclassman, man. So.
Well, I lived maybe 10 blocks from the Wall of Respect. And so it was in my neighborhood, so to speak. And it was an exciting time. If I can draw the picture for you, heretofore, we had no community art fairs. There were not all of these things in the park and all of this. So the Wall of Respect served a catalyst for so many things. Initially, it was to teach us about our culture. OBASI, which is the organizations of Black artists and culture in America, they formed with all the leaders that are very renowned now, and they were on the side of a building, a scaffold, painting these images, and people in the community would, hey, you want some water? The sister would, hey, I fixed this meal for you, and just, it was such a community thing. It was such a community thing that all of us felt a part of it. And so much so that certain people came together to guard the wall to make sure it was not desecrated in any way. Maybe I can try and tell you what I felt, because it was so significant. The artists were so significant to paint visual images of our leaders then. They even did some text on the walls. But these, you would approach Langley Avenue on the side there, and here's a big picture of Malcolm X. Here's a big, and only time you would see such images is when you would go and see images in the parks of white heroes. Okay. But this is the first time you saw images of Black heroes. And so it gave you a sense of safety. It gave you a sense of identity. It gave you a sense of you are important too. And so with all of this community, it wouldn't be right without food. And so all the little wagons of hot dogs and ice cones, we used to scrape up and make a ball of ice and put syrup on it and sell these ice cones, and all of that festivity went in the city at a time, in this little alley, I should say, in this little alley, at a time when nowhere in the city black people could gather like this and feel a part. And so it grew, and they grew. Other images were also drawn, and I learned that, and I even went to Detroit, and they had a black wall of respect. And so from 43rd and Langley, on the side of these buildings, it grew to other parts of the country, other parts of our cities, and other communities other than the black community. And so it grew to murals all over the city, where each group could tell their story. But I'm so proud that we were the first to tell our own story. And we didn't have second-rate artists. These were top artists who had gone to European schools, American schools. And so no one could say they could not paint. They could not visually and orally tell the story of their people. And while maybe this did not send a tidal wave across the nation, it sent a tidal wave in this community with these people in that time, in that moment in time.
I can't exactly say how I heard about the Wall of Respect. I grew up in a cultural community, so it was something that always existed. My dad is a musician, my mother is a teacher. They all came up during the Black Arts Movement or were in their early adult years during that movement. So it was something that was always in our house. I can't remember when I was not aware of it. Or even had questions about it, because it was just something that was there. I guess learning more about it intimately came in my adult years, talking to Baba Sam Greenlee, who just spoke with such reverence of the circumstances around it as the group of painters came together and started working on this wall in this one area of town, and the musicians would come out and play, and the dancers would come out and dance, and the visual artists were painting, and it was just a community thing that felt real good and was very organic. It wasn't like somebody passed out pluggers or anything like this is what's going on. It was just something organic that came together over the course of time that the wall went up, and a lot of organizations, Obasi, AACM, Afrocobra, I want to say Muntu, ETA, all of these organizations that formed around the same time, around really the same principle, were around this wall of putting a standard of self-definition and self-empowerment on the wall of, I think it was a grocery store at the time. And it's just really great stories to hear. Sam, like I said, Sam Greenlee, who was an author, just spoke with such joy about those moments of being out there, and they would paint till the sun went down and the street lights really weren't working, so they partied anyway. They just stayed out and partied until they couldn't see anymore, and then they would go inside and they would party some more, and then people would go to bed, and then they all show back up the next day. So it was a lot. It was a lot of revelry going on around this what ended up becoming a historical document, and I have to say, no different than like the pyramids happening, something enduring that was there that had an effect on really the rest of the world at the time, and the people that were putting those things together probably had no idea about how much legacy this thing would have. The Afro-Code, the visual artists understood maybe inherently was the power of imagery and how to use that before it started being used against us at a level that it is today, because the imagery is always, not always, but in this part of history of the world. But they understood how important putting these images on the wall was to fill the community with the type of pride that we needed, that we deserved at the time. And it had that effect. And it stemmed, while it declined or it was destroyed for whatever reason, it still birthed so many more murals and artists understanding how to use that imagery to empower and uplift the people it reflected. And I think that was total genius.
Speaking of Speak Easy, and that patch of weekends where we would get up on a Sunday over at the Velvet and kick it, you know, now it's all kind of surreal for me, you know. That is, ha! I mean, man, there was so many poets down there doing what they do, and I mean, we did everything down there. It was, and again, it's not like we were the first and only to do it, but it definitely was something that was very unique happening in the midst, and I'll clarify as such. LitX, we went downstairs into the bookstore. It was an open mic. People read poems, and the poems were very much so in the midst of activating a sense of humanity and what you need to be doing and what you need to be in tune to politically. But what is happening at Speakeasy, or what was happening at Speakeasy, was something a bit more magical. It was let's figure out what happens when we share space with what we do creatively. So you had like photographers, painters, dancers, poets, like all these people doing doing it all at once, and it was crazy. So at some point, the poet is not only feeding the music, or the music is feeding the poet is feeding the painter, and the painter is feeding the photographer, and the photographer is feeding it was always funny, because I would notice when I was on stage, the bar server, right? Don't drink when I was on stage. You know, I get a drink when I was just looking at, you know, I just noticed like looking at me, and I was like, okay. So even like that, the work is even informing like that energy. It was just something about Speak Easy, and I believe what it sparked in the artists that was there was to spend more time in being in multidisciplines. Like, I don't just have to be a poet, right? I can really understand what his poetry is in music. I can really understand what it is to be a poet who also deals with visual work, because I was in a space that kind of said, why pick one, right? I was inside of a space that says, at this point in time, all of it is needed. You know, in all kinds. I mean, it just happened all at the same time, and it was true to its title, Speak Easy. It was all happening at the same time, and I've been in spaces where it's come look at the poet and the painter, and it wasn't that at all. It was come dig this vibe, come dig this energy, come sit inside this space and not watch but lend to the. I mean, many times we were just all sitting at a table. Something got kicked off, and it became what was happening at the table was moved to the stage, and vice versa. And it was congregation. So, speaking of my influences, right influences from the 60s or that civil rights movement, Afro-Cobra, Black arts movement, those writers that find themselves investigating, interrogating blackness within that period in America. Two of my most influential writers that I read and kind of been like, okay, what they're doing, that's it. That's it. Would be Gil Scott-Heron and Oscar Brown Jr. Chi-Town. Yeah, with poems like Bitter Men and The Work Song, But I Was Cool. These poems that are not necessarily are investigating or explicitly saying revolution. They're more examining the revolutionary, you know, and who are we as people? Not just, you know, our story, the Black narrative is not a monolith, right? And what I dug about, or what I dig most about Gil Scott-Heron and Barbara Brown is that the work investigates who we all can be, how we all appear. When you think about, for the most part, when you think about Brown Baby, and this is this very kind of tender, vulnerable, and intimate moment that Barbara Brown has with a child, and you think you think about the Gil Scott-Heron when he's talking about home is where the hatred is, and it's getting into the mindset of a person who's addicted to a substance or anything of that nature. The canon that both of these men wrote in is very influential into a way in which I believe I'm doing what I'm doing with my work. And also the fact that they implemented music a lot. So I do a lot with music because I'm always kind of challenging myself in the spaces where these poems can find themselves. But when I think about my influences of the work or Black poetry on page, I'm then more inclined to speak about Sonia Sanchez and sisters like Carolyn Rogers, Mama Gwendolyn Brooks, Mama Angela Jackson, really looking at Mama Sonia and how she was placing the language on page. It was something clicked in me. I'm like, I want to do that. I want to do that.
I think that the same way the youth take pride in having Common come from here, or Mos Def come from here, or any of the stars that are around, when it's from your city, you feel like, hey, this is my people. This is where I'm from. So I think that when we have something like the Wall of Respect, and we can go there and we can see all of these great figures, that we know that this is from us. And that's how it influences you and gives you a feeling of pride. It gives you a feeling of pride, of purpose, of something that is worthy of your attention and to be on a wall in the first place. Right. Everybody ain't on the wall. I'm just saying. True. Everybody's not on the wall.
Yes, and I was thinking of how, the idea of legacy, of our legacy, because there's not only the legacy of the people who have passed on and what they left, but it hopefully makes you, when you take inventory of the legacy of our ancestors, that you will also realize that you are developing and leaving and ushering in the legacy.
And you will be an ancestor.
Right, and you will be an ancestor. And that, and that it's important recognize and to hold up the achievements of the ancestors to our youth. I feel it certainly when it happens for me, and you start feeling like, hey, I'm from these people. I too can make my contribution to the layers of history as this one woman Shiro or this one man hero that's on this wall, has done in the past. And realize, I too am the greatest. He was just a guy like me,
Exactly. And like when I was little, how some little girls, I want to be a ballerina when I grow up. I want to get married in a white dress. I wanted to be somebody like Martin Luther King who would never be forgotten because of something they said. And I was like, how egotistical of a little kid must I have been? But regardless, that's the kind of thing that I want the youth.
You value.
Yeah, that's what I value. But I want the youth to be able to know that yes, I am the next, whatever that great thing is that we need, because it's my ideas, not someone else's. It's my ideas that are what is important. And I don't think that we give them enough influence to use their mind to figure out these problems. They are smart. They are very smart, and they've been through way more than we have at a young age. You know what I mean? And of course, I'm speaking about the youth. So to build more walls of respect, to build more of that and get them conscious and thinking, and that's dangerous. What it is.
It is what it is.
What it is.
Poems and Opinions of Oscar Brown Jr. Yes. Says, my daughter Africa and Maggie continue to be wonderful performers, and seeing them and the rest of my children succeed has made me extremely proud. I hope one day that their lives in the spotlight can be as bright as mine has been.
Yes. I love that quote.
Yeah, that's a sweet quote.
It is.
And, as I think of like at my age now, I definitely didn't get the kind of spotlight that he got it by this age,
No.
And so, but what is important in terms of what I would like to see shine, and it's always been ever since I was little, is I want to shine the light on what he did. I want to shine a light on shine a light on this great body of work, and that, it's because we know that whatever folks know about Daddy and think so great about him, this is like so fractional. This is a small percent of what exists.
Of what it is.
And of what it is.
See what I did there? See what I did there?
It
See what I
worked.
did there? Yeah. So the thing is there is no other book
that's out. That's been published of Dad's
about
poetry.
my dad's work, amazingly enough.
Yeah.
So Oyster Knife, and you really need to get this book.
Yes.
It's a wonderful book, and it has a lot of things that are the soundtrack of our lives and the soundtrack of many others.
That's
because
right.
they have a lot of the old great songs that you know and love and are familiar
Flying
with.
Monkey
But
and
there
Work
are
Song and all that.
Mr. Kicks, but I was
Yeah.
cool, Work Song, Bit of Man.
Watermelon
Yes.
Man.
Bit of Man. That sun is hot and plenty bright. Yes.
Get out of business.
Oh.
Junes and Junes ago.
And that dear, oh my God,
Everything's in here.
Ba-doom. So that's about my brother Bobo.
Right.
And like I said, all of these songs are his life, and this is how he expressed his life. And it's so wonderful that this book has been put together to show what it is.
What it is.
Yes.
What it is.
It was in a working class neighborhood, in an area that was struggling economically. I mean, even though at that time you had many businesses in that area were owned by black people, but you also knew that there was economic blight. So some people may not have felt safe going there. But for us, we never had any compunction about going in that neighborhood because we saw ourselves as being part of that neighborhood, even though we didn't live exactly in that neighborhood. I lived at 63rd and Champlain, which was in some respects maybe a little bit, at that time, more middle class. But, I went to school with people that came from that area. I went to Dunbar, as I said before. People from that area right there, they were right there. And then you had all those blues places on 43rd Street, Jerry's Palm Tavern. So I've never had any reluctance about going anywhere. And I never saw myself being different from the people that lived in that neighborhood, even though some of them might have had more economic challenges. I never saw myself apart. I wasn't far away from that, whatever that would have been in terms of economic struggle anyway. You know, most people are maybe one person is one paycheck away from the road, and the other one might be 2 or 3, but they're not far away. So, but for the circle that I ran in, most people had a great admiration for the Wall of Respect and thought it was a brilliant thing. And in fact, we were very disturbed when we knew that the wall was going to be destroyed, and our hopes, you know, and the hope of many that it was going to be able to be salvaged and removed somewhere else. So by and large, it had a very powerful and very positive effect. If you know, some people might have thought the work wasn't that sophisticated. But I think the impact, the content, the substance, and the fact that people were donating their time to make this was a powerful story in itself. And when you add what the images meant to those of us that passed by it or saw it, it was powerful. It was powerful. I mean, I'm still resonating from revisiting that notion now.
You know, I think I originally heard about the Wall of Respect because through another artist that is in this community named Gwendolyn Pruitt. And I had, you know, such a love and affection for Dr. Burroughs. She was a huge influence on me you know, in a lot of ways. I just learned about her work as I was developing my own practice and better understanding what my goals were. And that experience of kind of seeing all of those incredible artists from the community gathered again in a place that was so important to this community, that was really inspiring to me. It just helped me understand that the work that I was doing and how it kind of connected to the history of this community and the history of the arts in relationship to this community. So the Wall of Respect originally, you know, was introduced to me by another artist. When I reflect back on my own experience and my own motivation for doing the work that I do today at Little Black Pearl, it is a direct result of not having the level of exposure and respect that I believe is necessary for our full community to really comprehend the impact that Black artists have had on everything that's important in this country, everything. And because we haven't had vehicles to really have that information push forward, it makes it hard even for those of us who have love and passion for art, and those of us who really understand and believe that it really shapes almost everything. Even we don't have the knowledge. Even we don't have the information in a way that we're able to really fully share with the broader community the impact that we have made on this country. So when I think about the work that I do with these children, the whole point of doing this is, to make sure that in some way that I can pull together a collection of people, all types of people, but bringing forward Black artists in a way that these children can see the value and understand our contribution drives things. It's not that we are the recipient. We're not the ones who, once things are created, we replicate and we begin to kind of, make them a little better. We're the originators. We're the ones who actually create these things. And because that information is not shared in a way that people can really fully understand the impact that it has on everything that we do, the value is not the same for our children. They miss it. They miss the whole point of it all. Because, they pass through things, they see things, and they have no idea that that original inspiration and idea or concept or invention or whatever came from somebody who looked just like them, who came from their community, who probably walked a very similar path. And so, as a result of us not having enough vehicles to share that information in a very concrete way, the value is not where it should be for the whole community.
The other communities became more organized because they saw they involved Bill Walker, the Chicago Public Art Group in particular. White people become more internally organized and organizationally. So from the time that like I said, I was younger than my peers, Bill Walker and Cat Time, which are some of the leading people. And Bill Walker got involved, and they soon basically took the arts movement from Bill Walker as him being the head to just him being a member. And that didn't set too well with him. And then my friend Cat Todd didn't trust anybody outside of the black community. And actually, sometimes he didn't trust the people in the community. He'd call the people as my best friend, he wasn't a trusting person because he thought that seeing that Daley and the politicians here wanted to get rid of the mural as soon as he could, and that the black artists were always being cheated out of their ability, whether it was art or music or whatever. So it was a big untrust. But the arts movement created for some who saw it as a way of formalizing it and making it an institution to make profit or money and to get involved. So it happened with music. It's like I say, it laid the alley laid the groundwork for jazz and blues and gospel downtown. And the public art movement was very few people in that movement, other than the people who became formal teachers, got very much respect or play from their work there. But actually, it was what we called at that time, we were into black power, black unity, black love, black. And so that meant that a way of black people identifying with themselves through the art expression. And so that's what happened. And as the Wall of Respect focused on black arts in the black community to give pride and love and respect for the artists, to love the community, and to give back their talents and to the community.
I mean, you got to think at the time, the Democratic Convention it was about to happen. I mean, you know, you got Martin Luther King, you know, about to be assassinated. It's just, man, it was hot. Like, it was a boiling point. And I think what's great about the wall is it refuses to acknowledge the downtrodden. It refuses, it says, you know, and this later on goes in Afro-Cobra. It's like, you know, the Kool-Aid colors. It's all about empowerment. And we don't need to see, we've seen the pictures of poor black folk. We've seen the pictures. We know the stories. We live in it. We don't need to see that. We need the heroes. We want the positive experiences. You know, we don't need the pictures of us with our hands out. We need the pictures of with our fist up. You know, and that's, you know, the point. I just had this really great conversation with Pomone Rami the other day, and he really kind of gave me a whole different perspective on representational work. And this kind of fits in this story. You know, it's like, I know when I came here, it's like, when I first started, you know, I came to Chicago, I met you, and, you know, we're selling work. There was this kind of like, yeah, you know, I make abstract work, you know. Now, I don't be making that representation. I make abstract work. You know, it's kind of like, saying abstract means like contemporary, it means relevant, right? And I was talking to someone with Pomone, and he was just like, yeah, you know, my house ain't just, you know, a bunch of pictures of black folks. There's a lot of abstract stuff in there. And I was like, well, what does that mean? Like, you know, he was like, he said, well, what you got to understand is that back in the 50s and 40s, a lot of black folks didn't have art on the walls. And there's a lot of negative things to look at around them. So in a lot of ways, the reason why there's a lot of representational work is because we need images of positive images of us on the wall. So we can't get them in the history books. We can't get them in museums. We're going to put them in our homes. And we're going to have prints on the corners. We're going to have, you know, all these images. So there's a time, not only that's what we did, but then I realized this, that's what we needed. In the same sort of way, Wall of Respect is what we needed. We needed positive images. We need to look up at the wall and see all these strong black men and women, not only on the walls, but actually making the artwork as well.
I believe the statement that has been made when something is in public is that it is an effort to educate the public. It is not decorative, okay? It is consciousness raising. It is a chance to give to someone who may not come inside a gallery a chance to see someone depicted in a noble way. It is a chance to have somebody wonder, who is that and why are they on this wall? And why does this thing exist? So it becomes education. It does not become entertainment per se. It is not for the aesthetic, although they tend to be beautiful. It's really about information, about pride, about how you feel about yourself.